Thank you guys for joining us on a beautiful Sunday evening to talk about the looming destruction of our democracy. It's always a pleasure to see you, Jeff.
You're from Fox or MSNBC? I never remember.
No
Which
comment.
one are you?
So
You did a time at Newsmax, didn't you? You did a couple of weeks at Newsmax before they figured it out.
it was OAN, actually.
OAN, yeah.
I wanted to start, so you have this wonderful compendium of your writing for The Atlantic that kind of tackles the concept of heroism and loyalty and patriotism, in a manner of speaking. And in the book, there are so many things to talk about, but one of the things that stood out to me, especially on a day like today, is this quote that you have. And I'll read it to all of you who have not yet read or purchased the book. Hopefully you'll do that at the end of this event. Donald Trump is the first president in my lifetime who does not try to unite the American people, does not even pretend to try. Instead, he tries to divide us. We are witnessing the consequences of 3 years of this deliberate effort. We are witnessing the consequences of 3 years without mature leadership. With that in mind, I opened up my newspaper this morning, as maybe many of you did, or looked online and saw the latest polling.
That was Mattis, right? What am I supposed to not say?
What's that? Yes, you mean the.
Yeah.
This is the quote.
I can't remember. Yeah.
It is from the Mattis story.
Yeah.
And the polling this morning shows a race that has really largely remained unchanged.
There's like 3 guys in Wisconsin
that are
who are sitting around a picnic bench going, who should the next president be?
Exactly. And when the opinion of, former military officers, former Trump administration officials, people who are otherwise pretty neutral in this sort of thing, is so crystal clear about Donald Trump's character and his ability to lead the country or divide the country. Do you have a working theory about how and why this thing remains so close, and whether Americans actually want to be united?
I
know, just a light start.
I have an unworkable theory. I mean, I have dark thoughts about it that I don't want to share because it wouldn't reflect well on me. But that have to do with sort of the 15 years or so that we've been swimming in this toxic pool of reality TV and social media, right? And the commodification of everything into entertainment. Put all that bad education, nobody reads, all the usual
civic duty is all the usual, the dodo bird,
all the usual things. But it's not an original theory. No, it's so interesting about. So at the Republican convention, the other living ex-Republican president didn't show up. None of the living Republican vice presidents, all the way back to Dan Quayle, who is not only still alive, but I think younger than Donald Trump, by the way, still, Dan Quayle showed up. The 2012 Republican standard bearer, Mitt Romney,
has been excommunicated.
Didn't show, excommunicated, right. Donald Trump's own vice president, of course, won't even endorse him or show up. The Democrats, you have every living Democratic president and vice president. You have Jimmy Carter literally staying alive. He's just staying alive so he could vote in Georgia, and it's like, so what does it say that no Republican leader at a national stage, okay, fine, so you write him off, and you say, the Bushes are jealous, this Dick Cheney, whatever. But then you look at his cabinet, you look at Donald Trump's cabinet. So few of the people who served under Donald Trump the 4 years are endorsing him. Most are actively, sometimes they do it in an off-the-record way, but they're telling everybody. And then you have, to come down to the nub of this, then you have people like John Kelly, who says publicly, he is the most flawed person I've ever met. I mean, this is a guy who did 2 invasions of Iraq.
Right, and meets flawed people in the course of a war.
He's a 4-star Marine general. This is the most flawed human being I've ever met. You have Jim Mattis, the most revered living Marine, right? We know Mark Milley has to be careful about it, but he has signaled in various ways that this man is a threat to the Constitution. Rex Tillerson, there was this argument over Rex Tillerson's quote, whether he referred to Donald Trump as a moron or a fucking moron.
Right.
But it's the same thing, right?
6 of one.
Yeah, I mean,
six of
no president in history has ever seen the majority. Nixon's people thought he was good at being president with a couple of character flaws, right? It's the death of expertise also is what we're talking about. If you want to throw into that mix, it's what does Rex Tillerson know about leadership? What does John Kelly know? What does Jim Mattis know? What does Mike Pence know? It doesn't. So sorry, I can go on I can go on all night.
Please.
But there's one interesting example. So after I wrote that piece about Trump calling fallen service people, fallen military people, suckers and losers, right? There was Trump, they came out with all these denials and everything. And then, like a year ago, John Kelly finally came out and said, yeah, he said suckers and losers. And what's interesting is that most Trump supporters who spoke on this, high-level Trump supporters who spoke on this, said, well, John Kelly's a liar. And it's like, you're saying that you trust John Kelly more than Donald Trump. You trust Donald Trump more than John Kelly. Yeah, and it's like I can't, you just want to say to them, I always remember this understated Barack Obama expression when he was really mad, when he got really mad, the voice would lower and then he would say, says, I just don't think they're on the level.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it guys, what are you talking about?
But I guess I wonder, as you look at his unwavering support, his ability, his resilience, and even in the face, I do want to talk about the assassination attempt because I think it dovetails really well, I guess, insofar as an assassination attempt can dovetail with anything. Mm-hmm. The way in which he has maybe even gotten worse than he was before. These quotes are from sometimes during Trump's presidency or in the period right after, post-January 6th. But in many ways, he is as unleashed, as incoherent,
off the rails
as he ever has been. And there was this, for people who still were giving him sort of the benefit of the doubt, I guess, there was some talk about how maybe post-assassination attempt he would be a transformed leader, right? Or he'd be transformed in his general posture towards the world. You have this really revealing, I don't know which piece this is from, but this is an off-the-record quote. It's an on-background quote. Trump has a lot of fear, one officer with firsthand knowledge of Trump's views said. He doesn't see the heroism in fighting. Several observers told me that Trump is deeply anxious about dying or being disfigured, and this worry manifests itself as disgust for those who have suffered. There's the picture that is now, part of history where immediately after the bullet or whatever it was whizzes by his ear, he stands up and is pumping his fist saying, fight, fight, fight. Did that surprise you knowing this? And have you seen behavior in the days and weeks after the assassination attempt that comports with someone who's afraid of death?
It surprised me. I was as impressed as anybody else that he got up and did it. There was a couple of minutes or a minute and a half or so when he was on the ground or some degree where you get to recover your senses. Now, I want to say that when you get, no one knows how they're going to react to being shot at and basically.
Do you say that from experience?
Yes. I do. No. In different, in
different circumstances.
In different circumstances in overseas war zones or whatever, you don't know when things start exploding. And you always wonder about yourself, what are you going to do? You either get tunnel vision or you lose your mind or whatever. He obviously, first of all, he was surrounded by people, Secret Service agents, who actually did the consciously brave thing and rushed to put their bodies between the ex-president, and whatever bullets might have still been flying. I don't want to discount what he did, but I think that just as he knew, because he had been trained, you duck down beneath the podium when something like that happens. I think he probably, like anybody in those situations, had thought, what do I do if something happens on a stage? You know, and so when he mind recovered from the shock, he thought, I'm going to raise my fist, I'm going to yell something, whatever. But it was a good performance. I remember it was so long ago in our crazy shelter political cycle that we all were like, oh, well, now he's definitely going to win because of that. It was Biden was still in the race. But since then, I've had the thought, which I think you may have had, it's like his behavior is worse. The things he's saying are more unhinged. Not only unhinged in a offensive way, they're unhinged from. They're just like series of these weird non sequiturs. I mean, this is the thing that I've been thinking about so much the last couple of weeks, because when you really look at what Trump is talking about, the sharks and the batteries that sink the boats, and would you rather be electrocuted by
the incoherent rambling, yeah.
And what was the thing the other day?
Childcare is.
Oh, no. Before that, it was there was another sort of windmills. Oh, yes. You can't.
Bird
nobody's
cemeteries.
eating bacon anymore because of the windmills.
Yes.
Because they don't spin, and then there's no electricity to cook the bacon. And each time this happens,
this is not an exaggeration.
No. And each time this happens, including the one that you're referring to, where in response to a question about childcare costs, his answer is, well, once we raise tariffs,
yes,
we're going to have so much money that we're going to pay.
That is, by the way, a very helpful interpretation of the mental,
Yeah, well, it all comes down to three answers. There's always just two or three things.
It was a largely rambling, incoherent answer, but if you sort of
right.
Yes.
It took a while to get.
It's a Rube Goldberg
Candyland kind of descent to that answer. But the thing that strikes me about all of these things is if Kamala Harris ever answered a question by talking about bacon and windmills.
Yes. Be curtains.
The party leaders would gather and say, well, let's go for the third try. You know, who do we? Pete, where's Pete? You know,
no, but
he won't say this stuff. I mean, it's just crazy. But like everybody just sort of accepts it. I think it's getting worse. He's getting angrier.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if this is related to the PTSD of almost having your head shot off.
Yeah.
That, you know. But he's getting angrier. He's been issuing these crazy statements about long jail sentences for all of my opponents. And you know, and I think it's important to take him at his word when he talks about these things. It's very hard. Like, I mean, I don't think there's some sort of pure science. There's no math to, here he's being semi-coherent and partially rambling and pretty offensive, but here he's being really offensive, but more coherent. You know what I mean? It's all everything that comes out.
It's all degraded.
Yeah, and by the way, he's decomposing. Actually, if you want to do something interesting and you're a masochist, go to YouTube and watch videos of Donald Trump speaking 15 or 20 years ago.
It's a completely
his vocabulary has shrunk in a really extraordinary way. I mean, a really noticeable way. I mean, so he is, and again, we spent a lot of time, you know, obviously at the beginning of the summer talking about cognitive decline of someone else. I
do think, literally in the last week, because the rants, the rallies, the press events have been so incoherent, people are beginning to talk about the ways in which he is showing evidence of.
But again, it comes to your question at the beginning, 48%.
Right, 48%. His numbers, if anything, have gone up in the last few days, week. It's the three guys in Wisconsin who can't.
Can you explain it?
I mean, listen, I can't. I mean, as someone, because I don't think it's actually about Donald Trump anymore. I think it's about this sort of what I think people believe as principled rage. But I do want to talk to you about Trump's rage, because you have some, you know, we talk a little bit about, or a lot bit about, you know, his incoherence, his petulance, his narcissism, his incuriosity about the world, his, you know, intellectual laziness. We know that Trump is an angry man just based on his rhetoric, but you actually have reporting on his rage episodes. And I want to talk a little bit more about that because that's not something that a lot of reporters get access to, if you will. This is when, this is leading, just in the book, this is leading into the moment when Trump orders Lafayette Park cleared of protesters in and around the George Floyd protests. And Trump says, this is according to Mark Esper, Secretary of the Navy.
Former Secretary of Defense.
Sorry.
Fired right after
Former
the
Secretary of the Navy.
Yeah.
Trump, inflamed by the sight of protesters so close to the White House, had been behaving especially erratically. "You are losers," the president screamed at cabinet members and other top officials at one point. "You are all, pardon my French, fucking losers." According to Esper, Trump desperately wanted a violent response to the protesters, asking, "Can't you just shoot them? Just shoot them in the legs or something?" So I think Esper takes that as kind of, or no, it's Milley who takes it as kind of a rhetorical question, like, well, yes, theoretically I can, but I'm not going to.
By the way, just a short parenthetical on that. The genius of Mark Milley was that he can say, in good conscience, today, that he never violated an order. Because what Trump would say, why don't you just go shoot them in the legs? And then Milley would be like, and he said, I didn't, and then he would be like, I didn't hear an order.
Can't you just shoot them in the legs?
It's like, oh, we having a colloquy on military justice? What are we,
Because Trump didn't say, go shoot them in the legs.
Right, he never would go, the danger of the next term.
Is that he's learned how to put a sentence together.
The danger of the next term is that there's no Mark Milley or Mark Esper or Jim Mattis or whatever around. There's people who will say yes.
Did you get the sense from the Milleys or the Mattises that these episodes of rage were more frequent than we understand?
Yeah. They were all, look, so John Kelly, again, who was really in the, as the chief of staff, you're the sponge. You're just absorbing. You're absorbing it all day long, right? Or starting at 11 in the morning when Donald Trump would come downstairs to go to work.
Yeah, right.
Literally. I mean, John Kelly would show up at 6. He would drive in from Manassas.
That was probably on purpose, though, right? 5 hours before the baby wakes up.
No. John Kelly, and this is. That's good. That's a good one. We're going to hear that tomorrow.
No, Tuesday. It starts Tuesday.
Sorry, we'll hear that on Tuesday on your show. Baby hasn't woken up yet. Get some work done. And I find this very moving, obviously. He was serving in the White House. Kelly, out of duty, he felt, and sometimes he would be so enraged, and he would, turn to one of his aides, say, I'm out of here, I'm quit, whatever. When he would really get upset, he would drive over to Arlington National Cemetery, be driven to Arlington National Cemetery, and just visit the grave of his son, the Marine captain who was killed in Afghanistan. He would just sit there. And what he would get from that is, my son did more for the country than I'm doing. So I can be in the White House and absorb this crap for a little while longer. I can do that for a little. But he would literally go to Arlington in the middle of the day just to sit with his son.
Can you
which is like,
that is perspective bringing.
Yeah.
In terms of how people made it.
And then he would go back to work and he was like, all right, let me just, we can talk about Kelly in a minute, but Kelly did something that a lot of people don't know about that I think actually might have saved the planet from nuclear war. There was a time, we all remember when Donald Trump was tweeting at Kim Jong-un, hey, little rocket man, my button is bigger. It's crazy to even say that these are words that were written by the President of the United States in direct comms with the North Korean dictator. And the anxiety in the intelligence community, and obviously John Kelly and others, was Kim Jong-un or the people around him will interpret this as
or provocation,
and we better do something before he does something because Trump is crazy and is going to blow us up. John Kelly's insight that, again, might have stopped a nuclear war on the Korean Peninsula, Kelly kept saying to him, you can't do that. You can't go attack world leaders that way. You can't say that. He has people around him. They're saying, how are you going to take that? He has credibility that he has to maintain with his military. They're going to fire a rocket into South Korea and then all bets are off, at one point, as you know, Trump asked Kelly, can nuclear missiles reach the United States? And he said, no, not yet. Not the continental United States, but they can reach Guam, to which Trump answered, well, Guam isn't the US.
Yeah,
and,
good.
And Kelly said,
Reassuring.
actually, you know, I mean, like levels here that are so crazy, right? But what Kelly did was Kelly said to Trump, the arguments weren't working. Like, he's so oppositional that don't do this means I'm immediately going to go do it. Said, you know, Mr. President, you're a singular figure in the world of negotiations. I mean, you wrote the book on negotiations.
The art of the deal.
No president has ever made a deal with North Korea. You are the man to do it.
Right.
And Kelly convinced him to go on that crazy pathway with the love letters and everything. But he stopped taunting Kim Jong-un, and it was like kind of a genius. It was a genius move. Anyway, yes, a genius move, but hardly reassuring in terms of that's what it does. That's what it requires to stave off, you know, potential nuclear war with North Korea's appeal to one man's ego and try and flip the switch. Yes.
I mean, it does beg the question.
Oh, you wanted to go to the rage. Can I just?
Yeah, please. The rage.
Sorry.
Because that is, it is moving to hear about John Kelly having to go visit his son's grave. But we also know from your book that, you know, Trump is at Robert Kelly is his son.
Robert, yeah, is the
and turns to Kelly and says, "I don't get it. What was in it for him?"
Yeah. That's like a. Let me do the rage, and then I'll do the contempt.
Yeah.
Rage and contempt. When we come back from commercial break, we'll do rage and contempt. So there's a story, a true story. I've heard it from 3 people. It's been discussed. Trump was in the Oval Office raging about Angela Merkel, hated Merkel, right? And he referred to Angela Merkel, the ex-German chancellor, as, quote, that Kraut bitch, right?
Wow. This isn't in the book.
What? No.
This is a deep cut.
No, it's a deep. But it's. I don't remember. You know, all these stories are there, and I know people have talked about them. This one is like. Here's the thing. If Barack Obama had referred to Angela Merkel as that proud bitch, that would have been the biggest story of the decade.
Yes.
Trump does it, and it's like, what do you think?
Doesn't even make the cut in the book.
And the seismograph is like, oh, that's weird. What did he say that for? But this is the interesting psychological part. You go to rage and the origins of rage, and Trump is going on about this, and he says, I know all about the Krauts. I got the Krauts number. I was raised by the biggest fucking crowd of them all, Fred Trump. I mean, you know, you don't have to like go to years of therapy to understand, you know, what's going on here. It's like, he literally said that in a room full of cabinet secretaries.
Wow. But his personal psychology animates basically every decision that's made, whether it's not going to war with North Korea or his, you know, bilateral relationship with one of America's closest allies.
Fear of losing. Look, you know, there are people dead. There are 1,600 people in prison because Donald Trump's, after January 6th, because Donald Trump's psychology wouldn't allow him to acknowledge that he lost. Right? Fred Trump is sitting there sort of on his brain saying, we know Donald Trump didn't want to name Donald Trump Jr. because, as he said, what if he turns out to be a loser?
Right.
Then he have my name. I mean, you know, so, all right, that's
Happy Father's Day.
Yeah, that's the rage piece. The contempt piece is what you're referring to.
Yeah, which is, you know, his inability, it's both contempt and narcissism, his inability to understand why someone would give their life to serve the country, which is maybe the most essential form of patriotism.
Right.
And then contempt that if you have given your life, whether you are Robert Kelly or you've spent years as a POW, as John McCain, then you are a loser. That contempt is a really extraordinary thing, especially since he's done no sort of self-sacrifice whatsoever in his own life.
So I don't understand it. I don't. Like, it seems deeply unnatural pattern of, it's a deeply unnatural pattern of thinking to me, and I think to most Americans, and we've talked about this in the past. You know, like most reporters who cover politics, we thought, you know, July 18th, I think it was, 2015, Donald Trump's on a stage, Republican nominees, and he's talking about John McCain, and he says, John McCain, I don't like people who are captured. He's not a hero. I like people who aren't captured. And, I hear that, and I happen to like McCain a lot, but put McCain aside. It's like in the rule book, in the rule book of how to be a national level Republican leader, or Democrat for that matter. Rule number 1: don't insult heroic POWs.
Yes, exactly.
Right? I mean, this isn't like Mexican rapists or trans or this or that. A naval aviator who on his 23rd combat mission was shot down over Hanoi and survived 6 years of torture, and refused when the North Vietnamese offered to release him early because his father was an admiral. He said, I'm waiting for my turn. Then they tortured him more for another year and a half, So I thought to myself, okay, I'm repulsed.
Yeah.
And obviously all patriotic Americans are going to be repulsed, but they weren't repulsed. And that to me is the break. That date is the break in American political history, because the rules of political physics that you and I understand just didn't seem to apply anymore. Gravity should have just pulled him right back to irrelevance, but it didn't. So I don't understand it. I don't know.
A figure in the book in and around the McCain world who I think represents that break in a way is Lindsey Graham, right? Lindsey Graham is McCain's sidekick. They have this incredible sort of very public friendship. And Graham comes out and effectively, disavows Trump for a period. And then Trump is elected and becomes a stooge for Trump and the Trump administration. And you ask him at one point, why? What are you doing? And he says, I'm not going to do a Lindsey Graham voice, but you can hear it if you just conjure it in your mind. Jeff, if you know me, he's talking to you, you know that I need to be relevant, Lindsey said without defensiveness. You know who I was just on the phone with? Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the president of the United States, Graham said. That's the truth. You think I'm going to go into exile? Can you talk about that moment? Because to me, that's the choice that the Republican Party has made too. To be relevant, to stay in power, to have currency, they need to abide Donald Trump no matter what the implications are. I mean, here's a person who had a deep and abiding friendship with a man he presumably really admired, John McCain, who has had his reputation trashed by Donald Trump.
Yeah, I don't understand it, because it's not, I like to think that it's not the way. Maybe there's a kind of person who goes into politics anyway. They have more needs. They have more emotional needs than maybe, normies. And I'm not saying we're normies, but
right.
We're more normie than Lindsey Graham. There's an endorsement.
We made it.
Yeah. Put that on the back of a book cover. More normal than Lindsey. By the way, I have this image in my mind. I'll never have it erased. You want a vivid image of the relationship between McCain and Graham. We were on a plane together. We were flying back from, I used to go to the Munich security conference with him. He would take a government plane, and it was a pretty small Air Force plane, and there was this sort of one lounger, sort of couch thing, and John McCain, he was a senior guy, and he was also older, and John McCain got to lie down on that. Everybody had seats or whatever. And then I'll never forget. And because he would stay up and talk. He wouldn't take a nap. And so he's lying there and he's jabbering about whatever John McCain, they do crazy stories or whatever. And Lindsey Graham is lying down on the floor next to him. And it's literally like
a lapdog.
That Victrola, I don't know.
His master's voice.
His master's voice. It was just so, I'll never get that
right,
image out,
and given
out of my, he just.
The intimacy and the tenderness and the realness of that friendship. It's shocking. Trump
it's shocking because you're normal, but it's not shocking if you're not normal.
I guess.
It's just transact. John McCain did something that Lindsey Graham didn't appreciate, which is that he died. And it left Lindsey Graham without a father figure, right? He had no, he grew up without a father. And found this other big, blustery guy, without John McCain's intelligence and morality, to be the father figure. And so there's that. But again, I don't know if you have to go so deep. And, not everything has to be about like who your father was, right? Or how you were shaped earlier in your life. I think it's, I don't think it's that hard. Lindsey Graham is like, I can do two things. I could be Mitt Romney and eat alone in the Senate dining room, or I could be Liz Cheney and get voted out of office by my people.
Yeah.
I could be Adam Kinzinger and have to can't even run in my district because I'm gonna lose. Or I can just use my immense political gifts, because he has great political gifts, to just go with the flow. And he went with the flow.
It raises the question, though, of that's a distinctly different Republican than the Republicans who served in the first Trump administration, many of whom you interview for the book, who do it out of a sense of not just here's how I still stay relevant and here's how I climb the ladder of power and get to the next rung, but duty, right? We're going to do this. I'm going to serve the Trump administration because I, in some ways, want to protect the country from Trump, right? Or that's what we learn after the fact. And you
By the way, these guys aren't pure. I mean, somebody comes to you and says, hey, you want to be the secretary of this or the secretary
Chairman
of that?
of the Joint
You're
Chiefs.
like, this is my only shot. You never get really, very few people get two shots at that. So it's like, yeah, I'm going to run the Department of Homeland Security. Why not?
But it sort of sounds like once they're in there and once they see how monstrously unfit Trump is for office, it becomes more of a sort of patriotic duty to stay there to protect the country from him.
Yeah, because what Trump does is in the Oval Office, what he did in the Oval Office was he would use humiliation as a tactic. And you don't become a cabinet secretary, 4-star general, by having a nothing burger of an ego, right? Like you don't you especially these guys who are generals. Or take Rex Tillerson, the CEO of ExxonMobil.
Right.
You're
not a shrinking violet.
You're a monarch. You're an absolute monarch in one of the world's largest companies. Then all of a sudden, this guy who is obviously not as intelligent as you are, right, is yelling at you in front of other people. Like the temptation to walk out is great. Some people did, at the first available opportunity, and some people didn't. So what became ambition then transmogrified into duty. But of course, everybody understood that when you go to work for Donald Trump, you have a half-life.
Right.
Right? And your half-life might be 4 months, it might be 6 months, but you start decaying in his eyes, and then once you hit the half-life point, you're gone. And
you're fired by tweet.
You're hired by tweet, and then you're fired by tweet. I mean, I have to say, again, it's like this thing where we're describing, and Alex and I both have a lot of experience covering the Obama administration, and which was no drama, even by the standards of an ordinary administration. And so everything that we're talking about here is insane.
Yes.
And I'm talking about the first term, but the second term.
Well, right, and that's what I want to talk to you about. You write in the book, if Trump is reelected president, there will be no Espers or Milleys in his administration, nor will there be any officials of the stature and independence of John Kelly, H.R. McMaster, or James Mattis. Trump and his allies have already threatened officials they see as disloyal with imprisonment, and there is little reason to imagine that he would not attempt to carry out his threats. Milley's telling his friends, though, I don't know how old, this is from the post-Trump era. Milley's saying that he doesn't believe the country will reelect Trump, but we are all looking at the same polls. It's a toss-up. I know that there's already, a sort of class of Republicans and conservatives who would like to work in the next Trump administration, but I do wonder, these generals, the military pipeline, right? Do you think everybody, as you say, the idea of a promotion is an attractive one, but given how these men have come out and singularly disavowed Trump, what's your expectation about who's going to be the the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Secretary of Defense?
Right. There's a big question that looming right now, a very specific big question about C.Q. Brown, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who is a very mild-mannered Air Force general, very technocratic, doesn't make waves, but was part of the Joint Chiefs staff when Milley was there, and when and the question is, would Trump try to fire him? He'll be 2 years into his term if Trump becomes president again. And that's going to be one marker. Would he try to remove the chairman of the Joint Chiefs because he's not loyal to Trump? So there's this interesting thing. by the time you make general, 1 star, much less 4, there's this pretty vast pool of colonels, and then I don't remember the exact number. I think it's 1 out of every 12 or 1 out of every 15 is promoted to general. And general is after a 2nd star, it's a presidential appointment. But there's all these different boards and whatever. It's a winnowing. So the chances are, right, that someone who's in a position to run one of the 11 combatant commands or the Army or the Air Force or the Navy is a pretty vetted. Mike Flynn was the exception, not the rule. Remember Mike Flynn?
Yeah, yes.
Of all the generals, like that was the only one who seemed to lose his mind.
Right, but there's not like a bunch of Scaramucci's like flying around.
No, you're right. There's not,
yeah.
But here's the thing: you're the president of the United States. You're the commander in chief. You could pick whoever you want to run the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines. You could pick them. You appoint them. So you could reach into the pool of colonels and promote somebody. That violates all existing norms and a lot of regulations too. But again, for somebody who says that they want to be a dictator just for one day or whatever, however he said, you could reach into that pool and find people, the much larger pool that's not been winnowed, and that is
a frightening concept.
That is a troubling idea. But the even more troubling idea is, again, it's the lack of quote unquote grown-ups who a lot of people who are sane, competent individuals, or having seen the first act, aren't going to want to
raise their hand for the second act.
Yeah, and so it's going to be both. It's David Frum, my colleague at the Atlantic, put it this way once. I thought it was very vivid. He said, in a second Trump turn, the velociraptors will have learned how to turn the door handles.
Yes.
Right.
That's a Jurassic Park reference.
Yeah, and people, everybody knows Jurassic Park. No?
I'm just saying.
I don't know. I think Anyway, they would know how to turn the door handles,
right.
And you don't. And so, like, they didn't, as you know from covering it, they didn't know how to pull off family separation.
They do.
They didn't know how to pull off some of the more dramatic things that they tried to do. This time, presumably, they have figured out the levers of power.
Do you, we have a bunch of questions for the audience, so I want to get to some of those. But I have to ask you this because, I have 2 questions. I know this sounds absurd, but it is the potential Trump administration we're talking about, so absurdity is sort of embedded in it. But he clearly wants people in his administration that would do his bidding. But he also hires based on looks a lot.
Yeah, totally.
Quite literally. He hired Milley because he looked the way he wanted him to. All reporting suggests that the way J.D. Vance looked, beard aside, was, he loved
his eyes.
He liked his baby blue eyes, He wants generals that look like generals. And does that give you some weird comfort that means, they automatically have to be pretty experienced? I know that sounds absurd.
I'm sure there's some 6'5" colonel in the Army who looks great and is like, QAnon has a point. I don't know. I mean, it's really true. I mean, it's all surface. He's casting his cabinet. Rex Tillerson looked great.
Yeah.
I mean, H.R. McMaster, he didn't like. He said his suits make him look like a beer salesman.
Right.
Nikki Haley, he said, she couldn't be vice president because her skin was too blotchy. He said all kinds of stuff, and this relates obviously to his, when he went to Bastille Day in France and Macron hosted him at a Bastille Day parade, he was like, I want a parade like this. But the one problem with the Bastille Day parade in France was that they had wounded veterans march in the parade. And he said to John Kelly, he said, when we have a parade, I don't want any of those wounded guys. They don't make me look good. No, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't even.
Commander-in-Chief of the U.S.
You can't, and it's like, but that's really interesting. This is why, I think we're all those of us who aren't psychiatrists are at a deficit, because I want to understand that what is it about his, what about it is about looks and his face and his hair that is so, and what causes such anxiety when he sees somebody who's been wounded, look at his very revealing discourse about the Medal of Honor a couple of weeks ago, right? He says, the Medal of Freedom, which is the civilian equivalent, except it's really just sort of a lifetime achievement award.
Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is kind of a lifetime achievement award, or you give it to your donors.
He was giving to one of his donors.
The donor, whatever, you give it to Tom Hanks and your donors and this one and that one. It's great, nice. He says, nobody prompted him to say this. This was just what was in his head and needed to come out. He said, this is a much better award than the Medal of Honor, because the Medal of Honor, you got to get shot or die to get. But this one, you just get. And they're good looking. And it's like,
yeah. They didn't get disfigured.
What is going on? Like, everybody, nobody wants to be disfigured. But our feelings when we see somebody who is living with a disability, or someone who's been wounded in battle. Look, he just made fun of John McCain a little while ago, I think it was last month. He said it was a very sly, very malicious attack. He said he was talking about the Obamacare vote. And he said, I don't know, John McCain, he couldn't lift his arms up, to vote yes. I don't know, he just couldn't lift. Everybody who knows and remembers knows that John McCain, because of the torture he was subjected to in communist prison camps, he was never able to raise his arms above his shoulders. That's why he walked the way he did. He couldn't lift his arms above his shoulders. Had a hell of a time, took 10 minutes to get a shirt on, right? And it's like, Trump is being, I believe that was drove out of his way to just be the nastiest possible thing. And so this is one of the questions. To
diminish and degrade John McCain's
One of the questions I have for 48% or whoever, it's like, you don't want your kids talking to people that way. You just don't. Maybe there's some weirdos, in your voting pool who are active sadists. But why do you want that? Why do we want that?
I gotta ask one last sort of big picture question before we get to the audience questions, which is, you talked about or mentioned Dick Cheney endorsing Kamala Harris, and it sort of occurs to me that maybe it really isn't Republican Democrat anymore, because the flaps of the Democratic Party are open to the extent that Dick Cheney feels like he has a place there as someone who believes in democracy, and that's enough. And the Republican Party is being led by someone who has upended all the traditional notions of what it means to be a Republican. So, are we even talking about republicanism and the Democratic Party?
No, and look, and it is important for me to say, in the Atlantic, of which I still consider you a member, by the way.
Well, I do too.
There's no such thing as an ex-Atlantic staffer. The Atlantic, we try very hard not to be partisan. Our criticism of Donald Trump is not about. We'll run pieces that think that argue that his tax policy is good, and there are pieces that argue that his tax policy. This is not about policies, right? Conservative policy. The country is healthier when we have a vigorous, ideas-driven conservative party arguing every day with a vigorous, ideas-driven liberal party, because then we, the voters, the citizens, get to hear the best arguments and then get to say, oh, I think that their approach to poverty is better than this approach to poverty. We're not talking about a party anymore. We're talking about an authoritarian cult of personality. Obviously, it has shed. It's not just the Cheneys and the Bushes and the Mitt Romneys and the whatever, the former first families of the Republican Party. It shed a lot of other people. A lot of people don't go out with a bang. They go out quietly. Jeff Flake and Bob Corker and whatever, they're just like, we're not running anymore in this party. We're lacking a conservative party in this country right now, and that's not good for our democracy, and it's not good for the battle of ideas. The people who are the Dick Cheneys of the world are constitutionalists. Yeah. They're basically saying, my loyalty is to the Constitution. You may not like the way I interpret this amendment, that amendment. You might like my policies, whatever. But we don't swear an allegiance to a leader. We swear an allegiance to an idea, and that's where the Cheneys came out. And it's obviously very troubling that more people put career ahead. But that's Aaron Applebaum wrote a great piece for us on the nature of complicity, and I just think this is the crucial insight is that compliance is the norm. dissent is not the norm. Most people, when faced with a strong man or this kind of move toward authoritarianism, just go, okay, fine.
They acquiesce.
They acquiesce. It's easier, it's safer. And by the way, there's a lot of benefits. I mean, there's a lot of people on Wall Street who are
Lindsey
like,
Graham.
they know and there's a lot of people on Wall Street who know he's like, they know what he is. And they're like, well, we're gonna have better tax policies. And it's like, okay, money is that important to you? I guess it is, okay. But that's where we're at. So like, acquiescence is the norm.
Okay, we have a couple questions from the audience. I have literally no idea how much time we have, but I'm just going to keep going until someone pulls us off stage with a cane. All right.
Technically 4 minutes.
Okay, great. Let's give me a speedy round.
But whatever.
Do you have any thoughts on why? Okay, I feel like we've sort of. Hold on. Okay. Do you have any thoughts on why the Republican electorate either isn't turned off by or seems to agree with Trump's disrespect of the military? Semi-related question. Can we expect the Atlantic to make an endorsement for president this year? Because, come on. That's from Jordan.
Because come on.
Yeah.
Well, the history of the Atlantic's endorsements is that I'm not this old, we endorsed Abraham Lincoln in 1860.
Good call.
Yeah, but then weirdly, didn't endorse him in 1864. No, it's lost to history why. I was like, what, war going too slowly for you, editors? Jerks, You can imagine Lincoln being like, thanks a lot, boys. And then it was 104 years later, Lyndon Johnson.
Just dipped out.
Yeah, that's like, yeah, Chester Arthur, who cares, right? Garfield, fine. With no endorsements, because it's supposed to be nonpartisan, and it's like you don't want to be like literally picking a side of a party. The endorsement in '64 was Johnson over Goldwater. Again, not because of policy, but because of temperament of the person running against Johnson. And then we made a decision in 2016 that we would endorse Hillary for the same thing, not about policy, because policy is, let's just argue within the framework of American democracy. It's fine. It was about temperament and character. And then, and despite the Atlantic's endorsement of Hillary Clinton, she still lost. I actually had
she won the popular
I had a
vote,
friend of mine who's a senator call up a couple of days later and says, a Democratic senator. I said, I don't understand it. Both the New York Times and the Atlantic endorsed Hillary, and yet she still lost.
Okay.
How is that possible? I was like, screw you.
Yeah.
But whatever. I mean, you don't do it you do it because you have to put a marker down, right? And then we endorsed Biden, and so.
Come on, just say yes.
When it comes out, it'll come out.
Okay, all right. Look at your newsstand.
But again, it's not something that we actually want to do. Just like
well,
fine.
yes, but he's running again. So
yeah, but he's running again, and he's
arguably
and he's worse.
And then you can wait 104 years.
Yeah, and then he's worse.
Again.
Yeah, 104. Yeah.
See you in 20.
Yeah, or we'll be in jail
21,
for 104 years,
yes, exactly.
So we won't have the ability to do it.
What happens the day after the election when Trump declares victory, regardless of the results?
Well, that's the thing, and that's the part of these stories, the polls today. My second thought on them is, this means that there's a lot of Republicans I talk to who are like, who really want him to lose by 5 or 10 points in the popular vote.
Yes.
That's a fantasy in American politics right
Yes.
now. But they want him to lose by 5 or 10 points because that way.
It's
the whole
resounding.
thing. It's enough that people are going to be like, but if this is one of those things where this one in Wisconsin is saying that this county went here and Maricopa County is doing this and that, Trump is obviously going to go, and then we're going to be back in a full-blown constitutional or semi-constitutional crisis.
He won't be sitting in the Oval Office this time.
He won't be in the Oval Office. He'll be outside the Oval Office. The only good, but that's dangerous because you don't want him to march, right? Like what we saw. The good thing is that I think that law enforcement and the Pentagon, to the extent that you even want the Pentagon involved, understand that safety and security in Washington is paramount, and I don't think the Capitol Police are going to be unprepared this time if something, God forbid, happened at that level. I think it'll go through the courts, and Trump will never accept a loss, but it is true, and I haven't really thought this out, so I don't want to give sort of a half-informed answer, but Joe Biden will be sitting in that White House until January 20th, and he will hand over power to the rightfully elected president of the United States. I'm worried that it's 269 in the Electoral College, and then we'll be doing something that we've never had before, which is a vote in the House of Representatives by state delegation, state by state delegation, which is just, and this is all interesting in novels.
No.
Summer reading,
I like a good rom-com beach read, not an apocalyptic electoral college
269, look for it.
Okay, this is the last question, and it's an interesting one. It's more about the Democratic ticket than the Republican one, and it's a purely opinion. It's your opinion. I'm not going to answer it.
Oh boy.
Do you agree with David Brooks' proposition that the failure to choose Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania was a fatal mistake for Kamala Harris? Today's Why Trump Will Win New York Times. First of all, the election hasn't happened. Whoever.
I didn't read David's column yet, so I don't know what he was arguing. I worry that that's true. She's a little bit underwater in Pennsylvania right now. I mean, one of the myths of American politics is that the vice presidential nominee's state, where the vice president comes from, really matter. Al Gore came from Tennessee. Dick Cheney came from Wyoming.
Yeah.
They won. Wyoming was not exactly a large number of votes electorally, or a swing state,
Yeah.
right? It's like 97% Republican.
Great for fly fishing, though.
So it's a bit overrated. That said, if Pennsylvania is your swingiest swing state, the most vital state of the 7 that are really being discussed, and the governor of that state is at a 61% approval rating, and Republican nominees in that state want to be photographed with him, then you might say, maybe Josh is a good idea. But, I think this is, we've probably both done reporting on this, and obviously everybody's read a lot about this. Do you pick a vice president to get you to the White House, or do you pick a vice president to be with in the White House? Now, obviously, it seems from what we can see from the outside, Tim Walz doesn't seem to have that level of ambition that Josh Shapiro seems to have, or Wes Moore, or one of the younger people, Gretchen Whitmer maybe even. And chemistry really does matter. Kamala Harris, I think, probably suffered a little bit, this is speculation, suffered a little bit from lack of chemistry with Joe Biden, and certainly with some of the people around Joe Biden, right? And she knows. And I think a lot of it, and look, I do think that there was some of the Middle East stuff, the Josh Shapiro genocide Josh, or whatever these horrible things that people were saying about him. I think some people probably did see that as at the very least, it's a troublesome diversionary issue, like what are we doing? But 61%, that's the number I always come back to. He was operating in a split state at 61% popularity. And, he could have spent literally 3 months in doing nothing but going from town to town in Pennsylvania saying, hey, you want to send this guy from Pennsylvania to the White House, right? And so, maybe there's something to it, but we'll never truly know. It goes back to this sort of thing. Why did, Hillary lost because of Comey. Hillary lost because of this. Hillary lost because of all the things, right? And so if Kamala Harris doesn't succeed, it's going to be a million different factors, and it's very hard to sort of say it's 7% this, 3% that, 10% that.
And if she wins, it will be because of a million things as well.
It'll become a million things.
But one thing in particular.
If she wins, it's because enough suburban voters, when they really look at Donald Trump, say, I can't do that again. I just don't want to do that again. And that could be literally 50 or 100,000 people for whom it's literally a bridge too far when they actually get down to it.
Well, the new book details lots of reasons why the bridge may be too far. Jeffrey Goldberg, it is a pleasure to see you, my friend.
Thank
you guys for coming out on a Sunday night.
Appreciate it. Thank you.